Welcome back, my friends. Today, what am I reading? Yes, I'm talking about my good friend David Premack today. Yes, we're going to be delving into a theory that he developed. He is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania at the moment. He was educated at the University of Minnesota when logical positivism was in full bloom. That is where he developed the world-renowned, almost as world-renowned as my research, but not there yet, the David Premack principles. Today we're going to be talking more in depth about the David Premack principles, and hopefully you'll get a better insight into what it's all about. Now that I have your attention, let's delve into David Premack's principles in a more specific light. Premack's first publication was a new theory of reinforcement. One must understand this to understand what it's predicated upon. It argued that more probable response in any pair of responses could reinforce the less probable response, demonstrating that reinforcement is a relative, not an absolute property. Now, this theory has 6 conditions that you must understand for it to hold true. Now, the predicted 6 conditions, all of which have been supported by evidence, are as follows. With one being, reinforcement is a relative property response. Now, A, B, C have a descending rank order of probability. A will therefore reinforce B and C. Now, C will reinforce neither. This suggests that reinforcement is an absolute property. However, B corrects the view, but B will reinforce C, but not A. B is both a reinforcer and not a reinforcer. I know, crazy. Yet, reinforcement is therefore a relative property. Continuing on, my friends. In the second condition of the Premack's principle, reinforcement is a reversible property. Now, to explain this, I'll give you an example. Now, listen carefully. When drinking is more probable than running, drinking is going to reinforce running. When the probabilities are reversed, running is going to reinforce drinking. Then that will be an example of the second condition you must have for Premack's principles. Now, my friends, please try to follow along your best, as I'm going to go through the rest of the preconditions you're going to need to have to understand for the Premack's principles. Now, 3. Historically, consummatory responses, eating and drinking, have served exclusively as reinforcers. But consummatory responses are like any other responses, subject to reinforcement. 4. Reinforcement and punishment, traditionally contrasted as opposites, are in fact equivalent, and except for sign. Now, if response A leads contingently to B, and B is more probable than A will increase in frequency, hence reinforcement. Conversely, if A leads contingently to B, and B is less probable than A will increase in frequency, hence punishment. the major contrast is not between reward and punishment yet, but between reward and punishment as contrasted with freedom. Now, freedom is the condition in which stimuli are freely, not contingently, available to an individual. Therefore, that brings me to 5. Now, when motorized running is probable than lever pressing, but less probable than drinking, then running reinforces lever pressing and punishes drinking. In other words, to be simple and straight to the point, the same response can be both a reinforcer and a punisher at the same time and for the same individual. 6, in the final condition that you're going to have to understand for the Premack's individual principle, is going to have to be the equivalence. Now, the equivalence of reinforcement and punishment is further suggested in this interesting fact. Okay, when we're talking about rats, for example, rats are either sensitive to both reinforcement and punishment, or they're insensitive to both. They are never sensitive to one, but insensitive to the other. And that concludes the 6 preconditions that are already supported by evidence for Premack's principles.
So, in order to utilize the Premack principle in the industrial organizational setting, it is necessary to have 2 or more distinct activities that can be ranked in accordance with their probability of occurrence in the absence of external constraint. And it must be possible to arrange them in the opposite order of their natural occurrence. Fortunately, many businesses have tasks that meet these criteria and could take advantage of the Premack principle. And unfortunately, managers frequently ignore this principle and are confronted with the predictable consequences. One well-known example occurs when different shifts are utilized to keep a business operating for more than the traditional 8 hours of workday. An often heard complaint is that people on the previous shift fail to complete their work and leave, usually the less desirable work for the next shift. This behavior eventually erodes morale among even the most conscientious employees that lead to similar behavior on each subsequent shift. Eventually, the organization may be confronted with a serious problem. Given a choice, people will do the more desirable work first and leave the less desirable work for someone else. The Premack principle not only predicts this result, but provides a solution.
Now, for your educational fulfillment, let's reiterate on David Premack's principle, and let's give you a clearer overview. Now, how do you find a reinforcer that will work with a particular individual? One technique, as observed in the Premack's principle, is to find what that individual chooses to do voluntarily. Now, we're going to give you some examples to clarify the Premack's principle at work. Now, as a rule, preferred behaviors can be used to reinforce unpreferred behaviors. This is called the Premack's principle. Now, after psychologist David Premack proposed a rule, a formal statement of Premack's principle was as follows: a high probability behavior is performed frequently under conditions of free choice, can be used to reinforce low probability behaviors. In essence, what I'm trying to say is, for example, a person who likes going to the movies but doesn't like going to the museum, that person can be offered free movie passes as an incentive to go to the museum. If he goes to the museum, we'll reward him with free movie passes to get him to do something he would do less frequently, and rewarding him with something that he likes to do with a higher probability. Now, continuing on, to give you some better examples. Now, if a rat likes to run on a wheel, and you can reinforce a bar press by allowing it to run out on its wheel only after a bar press. If you have a hamster that always wants to escape from its cage, then you can reinforce the hamster for climbing onto your hand by offering your hand as a way to escape from the cage. Now, the preferred behavior, escaping, is a reinforcer, and for the non-preferred behavior, which is climbing into the hand of a human. Now, this actually works, because I've done it. Now, parents, to give you some more examples, parents sometimes, they use a variation of the Premack principle, where if they want children to eat vegetables, sometimes a non-preferred behavior they can make for a rule is they can make a rule that to eat your vegetables, that they must be consumed before the children can go eat dessert. And usually that's usually a preferred behavior of a child, is to want to eat the dessert. So they'll make it a rule for them to eat their vegetables first. Now, similarly, children may be asked to do their homework. Now, sometimes that's a non-preferred behavior, but before they can watch TV, and play video games, which is the preferred behavior, they have to do their homework. Now, these are some good examples of David Premack's principle at work.